Now, there are other ways of engaging in such things. There's the pure revelatory explication. And so one of the things you do as a clinician, you try your best. One of the things you do as a clinician,
One thing that really defines me to my core is a real deep sense of fair play. Here, when I look at some YouTube figure, a YouTube intellectual, a YouTube luminary, I approach them with measured and constructive criticism. I don't take things out of context because it's cheap. It's cheap to do those things. And it's just cheap to have some sort of a petty hunger, such as like Nietzsche ascribed to shitty people in his philosophy, who are just shitty and, you know, looking for things and looking to attack. And that's just not me. In fact, here's a metaphor. You know, imagine you are a dog in a house of a meth addict, and sometimes they don't feed you. In fact, it's a low priority. But little pieces of dried sausage from a fucking pizza, you know, drops into a couch and you dig and dig, right? And then this metaphor is like the couch is like the YouTube algorithm, and the pieces of sausage are those red pill insights, and you're the dog, and you're just in there. You really dive deep into the couch because that's really the salvation, because nobody else is going to feed you. Everything you need is in that horrible couch, with the needles from the previous addiction, with everything, with the pipes, with the smell. But you know that there's some dried sausage there. You know that there's some nutrients there. And so you're just going to go into that couch like there's no tomorrow. You're just really into this couch. And in this matter, I learned a lot from Dr. Peterson. The couch is the algorithm, as I said, and I'm just all in there. I just spend my days and weeks and years in that couch, learning about women, learning about postures, learning about being related to lobster and that it matters, learning hierarchies. It's everything is there. You just have to kind of be a little bit furious, a little bit angry. You really have to, you know, make sure that the rusty cat dies before it gets to it. Yeah, that's how I feel about this whole thing. And it used to be, when it came to constructive and measured criticism of all of this, it used to be that there's like so many options. There was Stefan Molyneux, the philosopher. There was Carl, Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad. There was Mr. Red Pill, Dr. Red Pill, whatever. There was Peterson. But everything has changed, man. Now, like, the harvest is barren. Like, you know, where is Stefan Molyneux? Nobody knows who he is anymore. Back in the day, people would see a video with Stefan Molyneux and they would say, ew, that's Stefan Molyneux. Now they're just gonna say, ew, who is this bold fuck? Why did you know, find him at BitChute or Putin Tube or wherever Stefan is broadcasting right now? You know, I don't want to sort of dig that up. And then Carl is doing boring long streams, and the professor himself, Jordan Peterson, he came out of his addiction a changed man, and seemingly he wants to morph into Sam Harris, and you know, he's just seemingly like some of his spunk is gone, and he's just resembling Sam Harris now, and that was, you know, bad enough before. So my friends, I found this little thing of Peterson at Cambridge. He really is going to talk about the importance of thinking and talking. That's basically it, you know, sort of dropping those red pills at Cambridge. You know, that's what we're going to look at today.
If pain is more real than anything else, what's even more real than pain is whatever we have to fight off the pain. And that's free speech.
Okay, yeah. Keep going.
It's identical with freedom of thought.
There we go. All right. Yep.
It's associated with this capacity and necessity to listen deeply. They're flip sides of the same coin, to use a terrible cliche.
Hey friends, why don't we take this idea of freedom of speech and make it so broad as to be utterly meaningless, and dress it up with scientific pseudobabble from Canadian parapsychology and see where this train takes us.
And all the clinical data we have, including the more stringently research-oriented clinical inquiry, indicates quite clearly that the exchange of information like that, the generation of semantic and emotional information in a state of relative freedom, the revelation of those thoughts, and then the discursive analysis of those thoughts, say, and then the implementation into action and the testing of them, that is the pathway to health, insofar as that can be attained by, say, psychological or spiritual means. And so that's why free speech is not just another freedom or right among many. It's certainly not viewpoint diversity or anything like that. It's the mechanism by which we generate the conceptions that allow us to organize our experience in the world. It's that mechanism.
My friends, if I open my eyes real wide, would you see the reflection of my light in my eyes? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You know what happened in the Soviet Union? Remember all these poor Russians who got sent to the gulag for hurting their wives' feelings? You know, they just got caught up in the 1937 repressions of hurting your wife's feelings. Maybe you said her cooking wasn't bad or was bad or something like that. Do you remember all these repressions, all the suffering, all the tears, all the exiles in Siberia for hurting feelings? Right, because normally we distinguish between free speech in the political and social context, where there could be penalties for saying the wrong thing, and from talking about our feelings. There seems to be a distinction, and the reason there's a distinction there is because language matters. Because language matters, and in fact we have different types of expressions for different types of talking, and they need not be combined. But in the vortex that these Cambridge students are going to willingly enter with, the Canadian parapsychologist, it's all going to be one big thing, because we're thinking big. Because we're thinking big. Thinking big with Peterson.
And more than that, it's the mechanism that allows us to reformulate and criticize those conceptions when they've become outdated and sterile, to dissolve them into a chaos that we have to contend with while it's occurring, and then to reanimate them in a new form so that we can move into the future.
Well, here comes the insane logo, my dude. Did you know that every Canadian clinical psychologist has their own kind of a Batman symbol? It's amazing.
It's wonderful to be here. This is such a remarkable place, and for a Canadian in particular, with our rather, what would you say, paucity of history. It's really something to come here and see a place that's so saturated with, I would say, beauty and integrity. I hope you know what you have and that you take careful care of it, because it certainly deserves it. I'm going to speak tonight as a clinician, I would say, about free speech. Dr. Orr gave a bit of an account of the battle behind the scenes, so to speak, that took place so that I could come here and talk, and that's much appreciated. A lot of people put a lot on the line to make this possible. But I find the debate itself somewhat of a mystery. I can't really understand why it's raging precisely the way it is raging.
I see Peterson giving talks at the institutions of higher learnings all the time. So I don't know what's raging. Maybe a few kids get the douche chills when they hear that the psychologist, that the professor is coming, and they talk to the administration. But in the end, he's always let in. So I don't know if it's such a big deal when it comes to Peterson, this free speech debate. I mean, ultimately, the professor goes where he wants to go, seemingly, apparently. Maybe in the comments you can enlighten me about a place where he wanted to go, but he didn't go. Every time he gets in.
And I would say that specifically from a clinical perspective. I'm going to tell you a little bit about a clinician named Carl Rogers, and I learned something. I've studied the people I regard as the great clinicians in some detail, and learned a lot from all of them, regardless of their particular school of psychotherapeutic endeavor, let's say, or their historical background or their genre. I learned a lot from Freud in the psychoanalysis, from Carl Jung, from Rogers, who was a humanist, from Maslow, who was perhaps equally outstanding as a humanist psychologist, the existential psychologists.
Learned a lot from the famous Waffle House therapeutic school.
And the cognitive behavioral types, who were much more cut and dried, let's say, in their approach than, the more mythologically oriented, narrative-oriented psychoanalysts. They all had something to teach me, and I learned it with great, what would you say? I was driven by a great need to learn what they had to say, and thank God for that. Since they were clinicians, you'd hope that reading what they wrote would be helpful, and it certainly was helpful to me personally, practically in the conduct of my profession, but then also in my interpersonal relationships. Unbelievably helpful. And I would say the most stellar piece of advice that I ever encountered that was actually both, I would say, profound in some sense, but also immediately practical.
Was it take your lithium, Jordan?
Came from Carl Rogers. And Carl Rogers did an awful lot of clinical research into clinical efficacy, as well as being a rather admirable theorist. Now, his background is somewhat germane. He was really an evangelical Protestant up until the time he became a young man. He was going to go to China as a missionary and stop because of his developing agnosticism, and then I would say atheism, as a consequence of his inability to reconcile the distinction between science and religion. But his clinical thinking is saturated with Judeo-Christian suppositions. And foremost upon them, I would say, would be something like respect for the word in capital, as a capitalized phrase, respect for the divine word, let's say, but in a secularized fashion.
Oh, in the secularized fashion. Is Rogers aware about any of this? Does he realize, or is it more of a Peterson interpretation, a Peterson's elevation of Rogers' philosophy to the word? It turns out that all this time, really Rogers was thinking about the word, but it took Peterson to point it out to him. Unfortunately, he's dead, so he can't talk about it in a secularized fashion or in any other way. It's just, here at Cambridge, that's Peterson decides that Rogers' whole philosophy was about the word, about looking for the word in a secularized fashion.
But Roger was also extraordinarily careful, I would say, to elaborate beyond the word to the act of the exchange of words, let's say, because for anyone to speak, in some sense, you need a listener.
Thanks, Peterson, thanks. You need a listener. You need to exchange words. You need somebody to listen to you, unless you're insane. Peterson, what insights? Amazing. What do you have? Teach me to wash my hands after going to the restroom next. I mean, what insights? First Rogers was about the word, but he didn't stop there, that motherfucker. He went to the exchange of words. And when you exchange words, you need a listener. Unless, like I said, unless you're insane. Unless you're insane, then you don't need it. But that's not Rogers' philosophy. Rogers' philosophy is about looking for the word in a secular fashion, but also saying words. Oh, God.
And what that means is that if you're going to be a participant in a good conversation, or we might even say a therapeutic conversation, that not only do you have to be an active speaker, but you have to be, to use a terribly cliched phrase, an active listener. And it stays a cliche unless you understand what it means, but if you understand what it means, then it can stop being a cliche. And I can tell you that if you take nothing else from this lecture, but you practice this, it will completely transform the way that you interact with people. And that's something that's worth noting too, that something like this can in fact completely transform the way that you interact with people, and that it's actually something in some sense that's simple enough to learn in a very short period of time.
I don't actually vape to look cool, contrary to what you might think, but it's actually some sort of a weird, nervous compulsion when I film. I have to vape when I start talking for some reason. I don't know why. The other challenge is looking at the camera. But actually, if you were to ask me, Ivan, what is the essence of Peterson, I would say there it is right there. That kind of thing. Taking an absolute and total cliche and wrapping it up in a bunch of pseudo-babble and intellectual bullshit. Pseudo-intellectual bullshit, I should say. And you know what? I have no problem with it. Keep on keeping on, Peterson. I mean, it's relatively harmless most of the time. It's like, why do you need to straighten up? Oh, it's because of the lobsters and the serotonin and the hierarchy, and don't be a pushover. A woman needs a beast. I mean, it's just a bunch of stuff like that. I don't know. Usually it's harmless, except when it comes to except when it comes to women. There it like goes into borderline doing the same thing with incel ideas, basically dressing them up in bullshit. But if Peterson never talked about the ladies, it's like, you need to listen. Why? Because Rogers was looking for the word. He was looking for the word in a secularized fashion. First there was the word, then there was the exchange of words. Well, if you want to get in on that, you need to be a listener. I don't have a problem with that. People like it apparently at Cambridge. They really eat the shit up.
So Rogers said that he had noted in his interactions with people and in the clinical domain that it was very difficult for people to listen, and that most people had never really been listened to at all, or that many had never been listened to at all. Never really attended to properly, let's say, by their parents during their course of development. Never had a mentor or a teacher who really attended to them and listened. And Rogers also noted that you listening may be thinking that that's not true of you. Let's say as a person, you had people who guided you, or as a listener, you're perfectly good at it. And he would say, no, probably not. And so he posited a little experiment that you could run. And I would highly recommend that you run this experiment every time you talk to people for the rest of your life, because it really works. And it points to something deep that we'll go into after the description of the practicalities. So Rogers said, it was an axiom of his theoretical stance, let's say, and derived it in no small part from the Freudian revelations. I mean, basically what Freud did in his clinical practice was have people come into his office, his clinic, lay down on a couch with him not visible, and talk. And the instruction was, say anything that comes to mind. Anything and everything that comes to mind. So completely untrammeled, revelatory thought. Now, Freud's observation was that if you let people do that and maintained an active listening environment, even though you were hidden, he didn't want you to be dissuaded or persuaded in your utterances by any reflection of emotion on his face, that you would just have the opportunity to wander haphazardly through your field of thought. And what Freud came to realize was that the haphazard nature of that tended to transform rather quickly into something that was much more coherent and much less contaminated with excess emotion. And so that if you just let the revelatory process of free speech occur, that in itself was therapeutic. And that was a radical claim for its time.
It might have been a radical claim for its time, but it's one that Freud never made. So in Freudian system, you go through stages of development, and your unconscious gets formed at that time. Your being gets formed at that time. And for example, when you're out when your sexuality begins to develop and you turn it toward your mother, and then you're afraid of your father castrating you, well, if in that stage of development, if something goes wrong, that there's like a knot in your unconsciousness. And it needs to be untied, because otherwise you're acting neurotically and it's messing up your life. It's almost like your code, your system has an error in it, and you have to look through the whole code to find it. And then once that thing is untied, once it's brought into the light, then you're cured in the Freudian system. And so you laying down there and talking, basically rambling randomly, is supposed to get to that point of the unconscious, getting to the core of the issue. And the same thing with interpreting dreams. Dreams are like the burps or whatever of your unconsciousness, and you can parse them for meaning. But neither dreaming nor babbling incoherently to connect with, to highlight things from your unconscious, neither one of those things are therapeutic. So Freud didn't say that you're just going to lay down there and talk, and this in and of itself is going to be therapeutic. It's supposed to be a process to get to the point where that unconscious aspect of yourself is revealed by your analyst. and then once it's brought up to the light, you're cured. So basically, Peterson is bullshitting them about Freud. It was really a system that didn't really work for that many people. Mostly rich people went into analysis, and then from what I understand, they just started talking about their private life forever. So it was just a therapy for rich narcissists is what psychoanalysis was. It has no practicality, and yet Peterson is still misrepresenting it profoundly.
But in some sense, it's not that radical at all, unless you think that speech is divorced entirely from thought, which it certainly is not, although thought cannot be reduced merely to speech, because there are forms of thought that are imagistic, let's say, but certainly much of what goes on in the theaters of our imagination that constitutes thought is in the form of speech. You could say, well, we think with speech, and thought is in many ways internalized speech. And so the notion that allowing yourself to notice what you actually think about things by talking about them might be good for you if thought is in some important sense linked to, well, your bodily incarnation, let's say. There's the pure revelatory explication. And so one of the things you do as a clinician, you try your best, is so when someone would come and see me, well, first they were very tentative, because who the hell wants to go see a clinical psychologist? Right? I mean, you only do such a thing if you're driven to desperation in some sense. I would never assume to begin with that I knew what was wrong with them. Because what do I know about you? Like nothing. And so a lot of the initial discussion was just, well, what's wrong? Like, as far as you can tell, how would you describe in as detailed a fashion as possible what's wrong? And then if things weren't wrong, well, what might they look like? So, and that's a great thing, by the way, if you're ever arguing with someone in an intimate relationship, right? Because there's some issue on the table, and one of the things you can ask them is, well, what are your conditions for satisfaction?
Let's say you're passionately arguing about which movie to watch on Netflix, and then you're like, well, what are your conditions for satisfaction? And then it turns out that her issue is that you quit your job at the pet store because you didn't find it to be creatively fulfilling. And then if you dig deeper, it's that, you know, the departure point for being creatively unfulfilled should not be working at the pet store. And then finally, her condition for satisfaction is to have you out of the picture. And in this case, dude, like, don't always listen to Peterson. Sometimes it's better to just argue about little bullshit and like leave these big themes, like the big conditions for satisfaction, out of it. You just argue about little bullshit and just wait for it to blow over.
Like, if this was resolved to your satisfaction, what is it that I would have to offer? What is it that would have to change that I could actually practically implement right now? And one way of doing that, by the way, is sometimes the person wants you to say something, an apology maybe, and you have to agree that perhaps you should utter an apology, but you can say to them, well, what words should I couch this apology in that would be sufficient as far as you're concerned? And they're going to say, well, you have to figure that out on your own, or if you loved me, you'd know. And that's like, no, I'm stupid.
And the great thing about this apology approach is that it's not going to sound passive-aggressive at all. Not at all.
And I don't know what would satisfy you, and I'm awkward at these sorts of things, and I could use a hand at practice, and so maybe if you just let me stumble through this apology in the manner that you see fit as a genuine actor, then maybe the next time I do it, I'd be a little better at it. But don't expect satiating perfection first utterance, because you're not going to get it, because you're likely tangled up with someone who's no more sophisticated or intelligent than you are.
How can you ever be satiated, you idiot, by what another moron has to say?
So that's very helpful. So the clinical sessions were as free an exchange of information as I could manage. And one of the things I did notice consistently in my clinical practice was that if I really, really listened to the person, they were unbelievably interesting. And so I would say, this is rather corrosive bit of self-reflection, but if you're bored in a conversation, you're the boring person, right? Because you're not listening. Because if you were listening, that person is a strange creature, man. And if they told you what they're actually up to, first of all, it'd be a shock to them, that's for sure. But if they were telling you, you would not be bored.
One way to think about it, Dr. Peterson, is that not saying these things is really like one of the foundations of our civilization, is not saying these things and like keeping things a little bit more boring. Again, my friends, you really need to relax. You need to relax over there and not listen to the professor. Because, you can't unring the bell. Once you start saying these things, you really can't take them back. They're not going to fly back into your mouth and disappear into the secularized word. It's one of those things, man, like, it's a huge mistake. Now, the conversation will not be boring. It will not be boring. On the other hand, it's just the one-time thing you can say it. Like, you don't have a fountain, I hope, of this.
You don't want the person to reveal themselves in their complexity to some degree because they shake you to the depths of your core certainties. And that's actually a great thing unless you're already living in paradise, right? Because since you're not, the probability that you're existing in error is fairly high, and some of those errors are probably pretty severe, but that doesn't mean it's a particularly pleasant experience to have them revealed or to stumble upon them. So Roger suggested this technique, which I said I would get to the technique. He said, the next time you find yourself embroiled in an argument with someone that's contentious and uncomfortable, say, institute the following rule. You don't get to respond to the person's claims until they've exhausted that particular claim, and this does presume to some degree that you're dealing with a good faith actor, even if they feel differently than you do. You don't get to respond until you have recapitulated their viewpoint and summarized it in a manner they find acceptable. That's so treacherously sneaky, that rule.
But Dr. Peterson, they're going to think that they won. You restate this argument reasonably to them, they're going to run with it. They're going to think that they won. What kind of a tip is this?
Because what it means is you have to demonstrate that you attended to what they say closely enough and carefully enough to, first of all, act out validation of the idea that they have an opinion worth attending to. So that's a big deal. People really like being paid attention to. There is nothing people like more than that, unless they have something to hide. And even then, there's a part of them that would rather have that paid attention to than fail to pass, what would you say, to go unnoticed. Every cynic is entirely disappointed when his or her cynicism goes unchallenged, because there's a part of them, like a little unwarped part of their soul, that's still alive, thinking, oh my God, I hope someone calls me on all my foolishness and cynicism.
What the fuck are you talking about? What are you talking about, Peterson?
Because if they don't, that means that it's valid and generally applicable, and I'm in hell, and what good is that? And I really mean that. I really mean that. And so you're called upon to, first of all, summarize what they said, which is not an easy thing, right? Because it means you have to, and sometimes it's somewhat incoherent and emotion-laden, especially if it's in the course of an argument. So you have to sort of strike right to the quick. It sounds to me like this is the point you were making. And then you lay out the point, and then you see they have to be happy with your summary. They have to be pleased with it.
I just really had a deja vu moment here, as if I was sitting in front of the screen before, at another time, in another era or something like that. I really had a deja vu moment. And I remember another deja vu moment I had in Russia that I, generally speaking, forgot by now. My friends, of course they're going to be pleased with it. They're going to think that they won. You just restate it to them. They're going to think that they won, and they're going to run with it.
Which means that you're doing exactly the opposite of straw-manning the argument, quite the contrary. And you're doing them a favor in some sense by reducing it to the gist, because that's actually an incredibly complex cognitive operation. When you listen to someone very, very carefully, and especially if they express themselves for a while, and you say to them, well, it sounds to me like this is what you're saying, what you're doing is taking a tremendous amount of emotionally laden material, a lot of it unnecessary in the final analysis because of the ensuing synthesis, and offering them a synthesis, which is a great thing to do, especially if they're happy to accept it, because that also means that you did listen to them. So you signified that they were worth attending to, and then you listened to them enough to actually understand what they were saying, to try to understand it, and then you did understand it. And then they're way happier with you, even if you're arguing with them, because at least now they know they can rely on you to be a reliable listener, and that you're not trying to, you know how it is when you're arguing with someone, there's a part of you that really wants to win. It's like, I'm right, you're stupid and wrong. And so the best way for me to demonstrate that is to warp and bend your argument in some, make it trivial in some way it isn't, especially if it's directed to some degree, like elucidating my character flaws, and to minimize you in doing so. And
so basically, one is supposed to elucidate their argument as best as you can to them, and then crush it, basically go against that argument that you have been crafting so well for them, their own argument that you will now destroy. It's either you restate somebody's argument to them and you're going to make them happy because naturally they're going to assume that you agree with it, or alternatively you present it this way and then you still arguing against it, you're just crushing their argument in this way. So just listen to me and just argue about little bullshit. All arguments are primarily around hurting each other's feelings. It's like somebody has done something, the feelings have been hurt, and then there's just a little, just go with a little bullshit and keep it at that and just kind of smooth things over. You just kind of give up. You basically go for the little bullshit, and then if there's no way out of there, you give up. You know, you just kind of keep it with the small lobster. We don't want the big archetypal lobster of what makes you satisfied in life, or what's the big idea. There is no big idea. They're just feelings have been hurt. Let's argue about little bullshit and then move on.
when there's tension in a household and multiple, what would you say, systems of value operating simultaneously, there's a tremendous confusion about what should reign supreme, right? And you think, well, nothing has to reign supreme. We can all have our diverse opinions. No, you can't. Not if you're going to live together in harmony. There has to be some overarching structure that unites you. What else is a family if it's not an overarching structure that unites you? Now, within that, there can be tolerance and even appreciation for necessary individual differences, and obviously there should be, but that doesn't mean there's not a higher unity that the entire organization, let's say, is striving for in some manner, and not only striving for, but pining for, or even dying for. And I don't use those words lightly. Like, the absence of that incorporating higher structure is a felt sense of catastrophe on the part of the members of the family. They're always at each other's throats. They're interfering with each other's goals. They can't listen. They're in a chronic state of hyper-arousal because they don't know what to do ever.
Hyper-arousal is not the way that I would describe family life. It's like, hey, Mom. It's interesting how much Peterson is influenced by cognitive psychology. Like, there needs to be some concept or some big idea or some unifying conceptual structure for a family to work. And I don't believe that to be the case. It's like you can have a family with multiple religions in it that gets along fine, and then you can have people of the same religion and very homogenous who don't get along fine. It really depends on empathy. You know, it's like the writer Tolstoy said, all happy families are happy in the same way, and all unhappy families are unhappy in their own ways, because all unhappy families have their points of lack of empathy. They all have their own assholes in the family and their own unfolding disasters because of it. And it's just really comes down to empathy. Do people have an empathy for each other, or they do not? Does somebody abuse the empathy of the rest of the family, or they do not? Arguments become big. They become about like core questions of satisfaction when things are going really in a shitty direction. And Peterson is almost pulling you in that direction by, you know, blowing up something that should really be about, you know, recognition of feelings in the course of life.
They're hopeless because no goals have been clearly defined, and we experience almost all our hope in relationship to defined goals. So this isn't some, what would you say, humanity's myth or some reality that isn't as concrete as everything that you see before you. It's quite the contrary. And as far as Rogers was concerned, well, you had to let people talk to find out what they thought, so they could find out what they thought, so they could move towards something, so they could move away from hell If pain is more real than anything else, what's even more real than pain is whatever we have to fight off the pain. And that's free speech. It's identical with freedom of thought. And so that's why free speech is not just another freedom or right among many. It's certainly not viewpoint diversity or anything like that. It's the mechanism by which we generate the conceptions that allow us to organize our experience in the world. It's like, don't forget this. This is the fundamental thing. Say, the entire Judeo-Christian enterprise to this date has been an attempt, in some sense, to elevate to the highest place the notion of the divine redemptive word. And there's no truth that's deeper than that. And that's that.
Check this out. Peterson spoke there for a half an hour or more to the students at Cambridge, and he emphasized really, really hard the importance of thinking, talking, and listening. And this is really Peterson's genius. I mean, who else could give such an emotional presentation, connecting the talking and listening of the political sphere to one in everyday life, and how important it is to think, talk, and listen. It's amazing. In fact, no discourse, no human discourse or conception of truth is possible without thinking, talking, and listening. Amazing. It's amazing. But it actually is amazing. It really is amazing. I mean, he does have a genius for elevating just the uttermost banality into something spectacular. I mean, you really have to give it to Professor Peterson. Okay, my friends, so the good part of the video is over. This is just something that exists in my mind that I wanted to record somewhere, like on my channel, and I decided to parasitically, put it on top of this Peterson video, but it has nothing to do with this Peterson video. It just has to do with my life, and I guess the life of the mentally ill, I suppose. So please exit this video now to maintain the good times, to maintain the happy times, to maintain sort of that spirit of measured and constructive criticism on your tongue, because what's going to follow is just some like personal ramblings. Dr. Peterson makes a big deal with religion, that you have religion because you climb toward the truth, toward the word, the logos and the legos, and it's just the striving for truth. But that's not actually what religion is about. Like, I think religion is about primarily two things. One is synchronicity. You have a group of people, let's say a tribe, and you need to have synchronicity of values. You need to synchronize and put people on the same page, whether it's in like performing the ritual or group prayer. Just align their moods together, align their being together, put them on the same page so then they can function better as a community through rituals and through all this kind of a stuff, or mass or group prayers or whatever it could be. Synchronicity between people, that's one of them. And then the second reason for religion on an individual level is a sense of cohesion with life. For example, children die, often a lot of children die before the modern age. Relatives die, you get sick, and you need to take this random narrative and smooth it over to have a sense of cohesion with life, to have a sense of narrative. Now, it's not an explicit narrative of looking for truth, and it's not even the explicit narrative of being secure and knowing where you go after you die, because, for example, in Judaism, the afterlife is not a big deal, and then in Buddhism, it would be better if there would be no afterlife, because you're thrown around by karma into a new round of suffering. And so religion is really more about the narrative presence. You know that your kids went somewhere, or you know that they died because of the will of God, or you know that they're going to be reborn. And it's not so much the knowledge of it, it's just the sense of cohesion. It's the sense of larger cohesion with your environment. It's just like that rug that ties the room together. It ties your life together, religion does.
That rug really tied the room together, did it not?
Fucking A.
And so it goes more smoothly and nicely. And so the most popular religions are ones that slap a face onto the universe itself, slap a big face, anthropomorphize existence itself. And so a person, in dealing with the randomness, with the unpredictability of this existence, they have a smooth, nice narrative. And really, secular people don't really have much to offer, to some woman in the Himalayas who lost 3 children or something like that. It's about that sense of narrative. It's about that sense of meaning, not about an explicit thesis or an explicit word. So then religion really takes a high price for the sense of cohesion and this narratives, because these narratives go from centuries back, and all religions are regressive. They already have it. They already have it. And so they pull people back and enslave them to ancient books. And sometimes even other people are getting pulled in and enslaved into this notion, into this draconian narrative. But on an individual basis, it's not so bad. But this is actually not what I want to talk about. It's not religion, but it's that sense of cohesion, that very mechanism in our brain that makes religion possible. That sense of cohesion, and I mean, sometimes there's the cliche of oneness, or the sense of activization, or feeling on top of the world, or feeling just the great connection that you might get from running around the lake and then being tired, or having some sort of a religious ecstasy, just this sense of cohesion, just the sense of the narrative of your existence really coming together. And so if you have bipolar disorder, at least of the type that I do, I don't have the chaotic one where you get hammered and destroy your family life, but I have the one with the meaning, with the whole thing. And so delusions of grandeur, or manic grandiose delusions, they really don't have to do with like the person growing more and more self-centered, as much as they have to do with this music of cohesion rising beautifully in your brain, trying to compose text on top of the music as fast as it can. So it's not a conscious creation, and what results of it, the actual delusions, can be very silly, like in my case, interacting with a Buddhist goddess, or becoming the president of Russia, or believing yourself to be a reincarnated Lama. But there is a greater truth to it that emerges for you out of this elevated sense of cohesion, and then everything else dances in following that. But then of course you have a great sense of incohesion, where random information and tragedy and your whole life shatters. And this is really my existence. That's my shady existence. It rises into great cohesion in my personal life, in my private world. Then it collapses. Then it rises again. And everything that happens in the outside world is, incidental to what's going on inside of me. And I'm on my third drug to try to, clamp down on this shit. And this one might be working. We'll see. We'll see. But the one thing that happens, though, when you have this imbalance in cohesion with reality, when it's either absurdly in union with you, it's either that you're absurdly chosen for something, or you're chosen for nothing, and you can't even pull sentences together to make sense of what's going on. One thing is that's really painful in this equation is love, because actually I took a test, a psychological test, and it showed that I'm a schizoid, antisocial person. So I really am, and I don't really feel loneliness like a normal human being would most of the time. But sometimes when a lady comes in and I fall in love, then it's like all the loneliness comes in, and all the cohesion starts to rise. And of course it's for everybody. People feel a little manic when they're in love anyway, and so it rises and rises into something very pure. And I just remember, and for some reason I really fell in love with a girl I haven't spoken to in years, who probably doesn't watch this channel anyway, so it doesn't matter. But I felt something very pure, but it was going from complete cohesion and, you know, imagination and her smile and clever things she said, and then just nothingness, and then just big nothingness, and just chaos. I hate, you know, unfortunately don't want to use Petersonian things, but into something where the war, bloodshed, randomness, it's like when your sense of meaning rises and collapses, and you feel it emotionally and you intellectually know what it's happening. It actually is very painful when you're in love and you're feeling lonely, and this process starts playing with you. And so it's I can't really convey it very well, but I only been in love 2 times, and this is the second person. And for some reason, you know, it really awoke in me this love for her, and then my mind was going up and down, from great cohesion to nothingness, from loneliness to illusion of not loneliness. It's like a lot of my life I feel like magic used to exist in the world, and then it went underground, and it's no longer there in our age. And maybe you can make some earth spells or something, but it's like I'm sort of like this lost magician in the world without magic. And unfortunately, this is not just a metaphor for me, because I did believe during periods of my life that I could cast spells and control the weather with my mind. But, you know, there is just this kind of a sense of promise. There is a sense of promise, and love kind of makes this promise very explicit. And then it's just what everybody feels, but a little bit more refined, maybe. Maybe I'm being full of myself. But anyway, it was very painful, and it can't go on forever. But that was the second part to this video. So thank you for watching.